While Thomas Paine was highly critical of Christianity, his dissent paled in comparison to the antics of the radical activists Robert Taylor and Richard Carlile. The duo toured English pubs where Taylor, dressed in full clerical garb, preached against Christianity and taught it was nothing more than an allegorical solar myth. The pair were part disciples of Dupuy, Volney, and Paine, part political radicals, and part carnival showmen. Carlyle was the more conciliatory towards religion of the two, and advocated reforming it along rationalistic lines. He also took an interest in Freemasonry, believed the lodges had forgotten their true origins, and declared his intent to remedy the situation by teaching them the real meaning of all their secrets. Taylor, on the other hand, was an uncompromising firebrand, whose anti-Christian lectures were released under the title The Devil's Pulpit. Taylor's magnum opus was a book titled Diegesis. While it contained the usual mix of misconceptions about Egypt, the Zodiac, and the Freemasons common at the time, it was Taylor's misrepresentation of texts and confusion with sources that set the tone for future supporters of astrotheology. It is with Robert Taylor where we see a clear move from scholarly inquiry to general quackery. If Robert Taylor's claims were on shaky grounds, words cannot describe what spewed from the pen of Godfrey Higgins. A Freemason who engaged in esoteric religious speculation, Higgins' tortuous prose rambled over the 1,500 pages of his work Anacalypsis that combined esoteric musings, ridiculous etymologies, Freemasonic legends, and racial speculations bizarre even by the standards of 19th century British eccentrics, into an all-embracing theory of religious origins. Among other oddities, Higgins asserted that Egypt was colonized by black Buddhists who ruled Asia, Christianity and Buddhism were forms of Freemasonry, John the Baptist was a Mithraist, and Suetonius's The 12 Caesars was an astrological metaphor. By far the most important 19th century source used by Zeitgeist was Gerald Massey. 30 of the 97 citations in the film's original transcript come from Massey, and other sources quoted are dependent upon him. The three people most associated with the film's section on religion, Peter Joseph, Jordan Maxwell, and D.M. Murdoch, also known as Acharya S., have all praised Massey's work. So, who exactly was Gerald Massey? The problem is that the lives of 19th century occultists and pseudo-scholars have rarely been the subjects of biographies by qualified historians. Thus, we must depend upon self-proclaimed friends and acquaintances who are not always being entirely truthful. Because of this, some claims have been accepted as factual without any real evidence. For example, two common assertions about Massey is that 1. He was a member of Madame Blavatsky's Theosophical Society, and 2. He was the leader of a neo-Druidic sect for 25 years. Both of these claims are completely false. Not only is there no substantial evidence Gerald Massey was ever a member of the Theosophical Society, but he treated the group with scorn despite their praise of his work. The probable cause for this error is confusion with the spiritualist Charles Carlton Massey. Charles Carlton Massey played a prominent role in the founding of the Theosophical Society, but later broke with the movement. The neo-Druidic connection arose when a group claimed a number of notable esoteric teachers as their grandmasters throughout the group's history. Included among them was a 25-year reign of Massey as grandmaster. The problem was that this particular sect of neo-Druids was merely following a tradition of creating for themselves a lineage that didn't really exist. In fact, the group was formed after Massey's death, so not only was he never the Grand Master, there's no way he could have ever even been a member. Despite such problems, though, Massey's own writings and using the corroboration from various stories from his friends, we can outline some elements of his life. It's quite clear he was a 19th century English poet who became involved with spiritualism and began lecturing and writing on the topic. He and his first wife Rosina shared an interest in what is now called the paranormal, and they engaged in such practices as automatic writing and an early form of the Ouija board. Rosina, who suffered numerous physical and mental breakdowns, was considered by some at the time to possess psychic abilities. While initially mixing his spiritualism with Christianity, Massey later rejected this position and criticized those who sought to reconcile the two. He increasingly saw Christianity in opposition to spiritualism, while he portrayed the latter as an extension of naturalism. He wrote little of spiritualism after Rosina's death and seemed to distance himself from the movement. It is at this point that he began his interest in Egypt. While the source of his interest in the land of the pharaohs is not entirely clear, his prior explorations of the paranormal likely placed him in contact with esoteric thinkers who were following the strands of thought present since Renaissance Hermetism, including their ideas on Egypt. This would explain, for example, his close friendship with Freemasonic historian and author Albert Churchward. While exciting discoveries were in fact made in Egypt during Massey's lifetime, Egyptology was still in its infancy, and the experts were usually at odds even with each other and prone to quite wild speculations. Even worse were popular authors whose books on the topics veered into bizarre ideas about Atlantis and pyramidology. Massey's work reflected previous esoteric speculation concerning Egypt's role in creating religion. He also showed familiarity with earlier works by Volney, Dupuy, Payne, Taylor, and Higgins. Clearly, his friendship with Albert Churchward offered opportunities to become familiar with further esoteric explorations on religion, even if he did not accept such conclusions in their entirety. However, it would be unfair to claim Massey merely parroted earlier sources. He clearly took these ideas in new directions, and his perspective, veering between spiritualist and free-thinking sympathies, was quite original. Nor was he dishonest in drawing his conclusions, as he clearly believed everything he wrote. However, his methods were rooted in assumptions outdated even in his own day. His attempts to reconcile astrotheology, esoteric ideas, and Egyptology into a comprehensive theory of religion are now little more than pseudo-scholarly period pieces. Those heavily reliant upon Massey are motivated to defend him, and none more so than D.M. Murdoch, also known as Acharya S. She has claimed he lived when Egyptology was in its heyday, and his work was consistent with that of Egyptologists in his day. If by Egyptology's heyday she meant a time of great archaeological discoveries, that would be fair, but Massey was not part of that process. If, on the other hand, she's referring to the actual understanding of Egyptian religion and culture, she is quite far off the mark. It would take decades to remove the barnacles attached to the image of Egypt by centuries of Western misconceptions. As for Massey's consistency with the Egyptologists of his day, even if it is true, the opinion of Egyptologists of the mid-19th century has little bearing on contemporary relevance. Most amusing, though, is her attempt to call upon Eric Horning as testimony to Massey's significance, but she completely misrepresented the noted Egyptologist's point. Horning mentioned Massey in the context of describing the output of various authors influenced by the occult who had popularized various distortions of Egyptian history. His citing Massey as one of those who influenced such esoteric circles was hardly intended as a compliment. The role of Massey will be far more central in the second volume of this project when I specifically address the pagan parallels accusations promoted by Zeitgeist. For now, I will note that Massey's infamous attempts to impose New Testament parallels upon Egyptian artifacts are monuments to amateurish speculation of a bygone era. If Gerald Massey was sincerely misguided, that sincerity was definitely a step up from the pure quackery of Percy Graves. Author of the world's 16 crucified saviors, Graves moved from the radical ends of Quakerism to spiritualism to freethinker who, along the way, rejected Christianity as a plot by a priestcraft to delude their gullible followers. Believing the story of Jesus was pieced together from earlier pagan mythology, Graves claimed there were other crucified saviors. None of the supposed victims were associated with such a death, and he failed to produce any evidence that they were, apart from his saying so. Graves' documentation was at best haphazard and usually non-existent. Thoroughly refuted by John T. Purry in his own lifetime, Graves was largely forgotten, until atheist activist Madeleine Murray O'Hair discovered his book and his quackery gained a new lease on life. Generally, most skeptical websites whose authors actually care about being thorough and scholarly warn their readers to avoid Graves like the plague. All sorts of other oddballs added to the parade by connecting to various degrees to astrotheology. There were Freemasonic historians, occultists, believers in lost continents, and all seemed to have something to say about a lost ancient religion that served as the blueprint for all future faiths. All of it echoed the sort of esoteric speculation floating around since Renaissance Hermetism, and each was ridiculous in its own special way. But none was more ridiculous than the claim that mankind had descended from a series of root races that included the hermaphroditic egg-laying ape-men of the lost continent of Lemuria, who reigned supreme until replaced by the Aryans of Atlantis. The fertile imagination that produced this drivel was Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, better known as Madame Blavatsky, who cast a larger-than-life presence in 19th century esoteric circles. A colorful figure and future founder of the Theosophical Society, she began her career as a spiritualist medium, but transformed herself into an esoteric prophet. Not content with the everyday exaggerations of lesser occult wonders, Blavatsky aimed for the sky and found a willing audience for the most astounding nonsense. Nothing strained credulity enough to break the spell the charismatic Russian émigré held over her educated and wealthy following. She claimed she received knowledge from ascended masters of a great white brotherhood, and that her book, The Secret Doctrine, was based upon an ancient text titled the Book of Zion, written in the language of Censar, once known to the priests of Atlantis. Any examination of her writings must conclude that they are pure gibberish. There were no root races, there was no Lemuria, and there are no ascended masters. Her theories were not only baseless, but quite ridiculously so. The Theosophical Society contained many writers far more erudite than Blavatsky, and they sought to put an intellectual face upon the movement by publishing important esoteric titles. While few may retain some historical interests, the bulk is just pure pseudo-scholarship. Today, the corpus of the Theosophical Society stands out like esoteric leisure suits, the uncomfortable reminders of past bad taste. Moving to more recent sources, Alfred Boyne Kuhn was an occult author largely dependent upon Higgins, Massey, and earlier writers. He also rivaled the difficult task of sometimes seeming less lucid than Godfrey Higgins. Anyone who has suffered through his rambling explanations of the hidden meanings of everyday things will gain a better understanding of the term crank. Among these was his explanation that the letter A symbolized primordial unity, split apart from the top into the creative duality of spirit and matter, the crossbar indicating the interrelation which dynamically subsists between them. In reality, our script descends from a Proto-Canaanite model brought to Greece and later elsewhere in the West through the trading prowess of the Phoenicians. The A was originally upside down and tilted to one side and represented the head of an ox. Throughout the 20th century, the popular support for astrotheology vanished. Scholarly support had disappeared long before. The best known of the later promoters was Manly P. Hall, who later became an elder statesman for what would coalesce as the New Age movement. But, for all intents and purposes, astrotheology was a spent force.